In my big dream imagining, we get to distill the deepest stories and the truths that come out of community and out of history. When we have our voices heard and have our messages heard, we become leaders. Yetsap Oweliel, Siaya, Siem, Si Alaqua, Ich Imachna Etan, Antha Jada-Gabrielle Pape, Antha Wu Wasselwat. Welcome to the Drawing Wisdom video podcast. We're in season 3. This is episode 4, and we're diving into a conversation with Wendy Stevens. It's really nice to see you, and it's nice to have you visit with me. Like all of our best episodes, we're going to have dog sounds in the background. We're going to just visit through all of the panting, grunting, snorting, and snoring of these two. Will you, before we dive in, could you introduce yourself as you'd like to be known in this conversation?
And thank you for having me. It's very much an honor to be here in your home. My name is Wendy Stevens. I work as the Peer Operations Coordinator at Vancouver Coastal Health's Overdose Emergency Response Team. I do want to say that anything I say is just Wendy. It's not Wendy from Vancouver Coastal Health. I'm also a person with lived experience around substance use and sex trade work and HIV and being unhoused, all the stuff that can go with that. I'm very fortunate to be able to draw on all of my time when I was still out there to teach healthcare providers, mostly healthcare providers, on things like trauma-informed practice and stigma, how to work with people who are using drugs. A lot of what I like to call How Not to Be a Jerk 101. I don't tell them that I call that now.
Well, you just did.
But I just did, and that is okay. A lot of educating and a lot of teaching people. I guess reflecting on everything I learned and saw. I knew when I was still down there, still very much in it, that I remember I would have these moments of clarity or thought, and I would think if I can ever use everything I'd learned and experienced and seen to help other people, and I had no idea what context that would be, but if I could use all of that to help other people, then all of my time out there wasn't for nothing. And yeah, it's great, and I do love working with peers on downtown East Side. I've gotten a little ahead of myself. I should also say that I'm from Vancouver Island. I was born in Campbell River and raised in Victoria, which was great. I grew up not appreciating the island as much as I do now when I go back. And I moved to Vancouver in 1999. And yeah, I've been here ever since.
So you still sometimes go back? You still sometimes go and visit the island?
Occasionally, not as much as I would like to. My partner's family are there now. They retired and moved back there, so we get to go there and hang out for little bits of time at a time. Yeah.
I'm from the island, and so I back and forth, and those ferries, I've always found that there's something that happens as I cross the water on the ferry, that after a certain amount of time between the two places, my body rhythm will change and my breath will deepen and calm, and there's like just all of a sudden there's a going home feeling. We met doing hardcore, and some of my understanding comes from my own experiences of being displaced, of being an urban Indigenous person. What's the story of hardcore? What is hardcore? What's the history of this curriculum, of this teaching?
Well, for starters, hardcore didn't have a name for a very long time. We're fortunate it has a name now. So what the original plan was, or what the original intent was, and it's changed quite a few times to get it to where it is now. We've been doing the planning and working on this for a pretty long time. It was before COVID, maybe 2 years. Doctor came to us, she got some money to do some research on more of the clinical side of trauma with people who use drugs, who have experienced trauma and are in the downtown east side. there were two parts to the money. There was the research part, and then there was the curriculum part. So we got started, and one of the first things we had to do when we were planning is what's called an environmental scan. So we had a couple of people go out into the community of the downtown east side to go and check for resources for people who use substances, who've experienced trauma. And I think we were shocked but not really surprised that there weren't any, unless you have money to pay a counselor to talk for an hour, and most people don't have that kind of income or that kind of money available. We started with interviews, sort of advisory interviews with random people that we would pay, of course, to do a little survey. What could trauma education look like for you? Who would you like to be teaching this? Would it be a counselor? Would it be a peer? Would it be both? How long would a session be? Would there be consequences if someone broke confidentiality? That sort of thing. Yeah, so that's where it started, and things kind of fell apart after COVID. We had to pretty much regroup. Something that we focused on quite a bit was, what would the group of people be like? Like, what do we want for this group of people? And, trust and, confidentiality and safety, or feeling as safe as possible, that sort of thing, and cohesion. And it was really interesting when things really started to unravel. We discovered that the things that we were wanting for this eventual group and groups that we would be bringing this course to, that the things we wanted for them, we didn't do for ourselves. For example, and this is the one that kind of really was a head shaker and an eye-opener for me, was one of the people in the original group, he wasn't sure how to refer to the doctor, whether he should call her Doctor this or Doc or by her first name, or he didn't even know what to call her. And we're trying to put together a group. We're trying to put together something where people can come together and hopefully learn some tools and all that, but we didn't do the same sort of cohesion, trust things in ourselves.
Right, so it wasn't embodied. It was still theoretical and still trying to figure out what this was going to be, and actually you were living through part of what needed addressing.
Exactly.
Part of what you needed tending to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so one of the people on our team is a nurse with a lot of trauma education. I think they did their master's in yeah. So that was good. But when we were developing the curriculum, we had one Indigenous person on our team. She's moved away and is doing amazing, incredible things. But she came in and she really opened our eyes to what we were not doing as well. And I'm grateful for her. I learned a lot from her. So we needed to kind of go back and do some unlearning and something new. So we had people come in over Zoom, of course, because they were in different parts of Canada, and do some work with us on a reach worker, a social worker, counselor, and an elder on team building, basically. And that was really good. And we came out of that so much better, just as our small group. Then we realized what we needed to do more, and we needed more of is content.
So you were starting to build a cohesive team, but part of what you needed was actually to have the material and...
Right, so when we were making the material, we all had the best of intentions. Only one of us is really, I guess, a trauma, I don't want to say expert, but has really a lot of clinical and academic. She's done a lot of clinical and academic work and trauma, but the mistakes that we were making that we found out when we were so lucky to have you come in was, things like naming specific traumas, and something that you said, and I think about this a lot, not just in this course, but other places in my life, in my work, is when you name something specifically, you're inviting it into the room. And I hold on to that very tightly. I'd never thought of that before, but it's so true. And we sat down and we're going to talk about this kind of trauma and that kind of trauma and this specific trauma. And then it was like, oh, maybe we better not do that, because that's going to lead to possibly, people being traumatized in our group. Opening something that we can't close. More harm than good, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the way that I think about it is, I think in the beginning, we had a little list of, let's talk about, I think we called it trauma basics. And as soon as you say the word, most of us have lived through trauma, is one thing we know to be true. But as soon as you say the words, we're going to talk about trauma, with anyone who's lived through trauma, they immediately go into their own trauma, because you just said that, and then it wakes it all up, and that's actually where they are for that moment. And then if you continue and deepen it and say, we're going to talk about childhood violence, we're going to talk about, and you start to go through these lists of basic traumas, or extensive traumas. We've put people in the state of alarm with a bunch of words, and then we've got a whole bunch of tending we need to do. So rather, we want to walk people through, we're going to talk about some of the amazing tools that we have in a toolbox to provide ourselves with some ease. And as soon as you've got that player in the room, you have to address them. So you don't have to name everything every time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually didn't know that there were quite so many comings and goings. And like when I was invited in, I remember the first time I met you was over Zoom, and we were still pretty locked down. Yeah. And like from the pandemic. And I remember the first time I met you, and people were just sort of coming into the screen, and I was immediately like, who's this person? This person's really got like a good, articulate, warm head on their shoulders. Like, this is great. And then that we got to work together in such a consistent way and learn from each other as we were going along. And then we did our first pilot. And I think, so your team created these 5 really strong sessions. Each session deals with another aspect of how to put tools in the toolbox. And then my role was really actually just to work with what you already had and sort of to show you that this is fantastic, because I didn't do anything. We just sort of laid it out. But then we ran the pilot together, and what we saw is that when people are given a chance to learn some of the tools of calming their nervous system, it would change how things sat in the room. Mm-hmm. So like the first session, when all of us were there, ready to like, we've got these things, these are our tricks, let's show this to you guys. And there was this sort of agitated state in the room. Mm-hmm. And I remember lots of people were coming and going. Yep. We couldn't get people to settle. And I think even some like older conversations that were pretty heated were happening. Yep. And we were trying to start, but we couldn't start because there's lots of people cross-talking, and I don't want to say arguing, but people were advocating for certain things around the table, quite literally around the table in the room. And then as soon as we started talking about the breathing and the sitting and holding the space, everything shifted, and all of a sudden no one was arguing. Mm-hmm. And everyone was breathing together. And people were sort of like, their bodies were sort of more upright, and they were ready to learn something together. And I remember just every single session that we ran together, that it was never smooth, it was never easy. No. It was never perfect. And I always left feeling more attached to each other and feeling more hopeful about the world. And actually, that's one of the most powerful experiences in my work life in 2022 was working on this project, working on Heartcore. Because not a lot was giving a lot of us hope. And I guess the context of what's happening, this curriculum was created out of care and out of love for community members in the downtown east side and by community members in the downtown east side. And that's where the hope was. That's where the hope remains, actually.
Yeah. And what I really like is, coming back each week when we were doing that pilot and asking people, what tools did you use over the last week? And people would say, I used the breathing, or I used the breathing exercise. And it was great, and people actually remembered what they had learned. And I think a lot of the time people just really want those tools in their medicine pouch, right? Or in their toolbox. There's so much sometimes uncertainty and not a lot of hope to be found in the world sometimes, especially what's going on in our community. But yeah, it was cool after people did settle.
Yeah, when I think about hope in general, I'm very curious about hope because I feel like hope is the thing that keeps us alive. That is, when we have a loss of hope, we have a cease of life, right? And that, and I think a lot about where do we find hope in this world as Indigenous people, and where do we find hope in a world that's really colonially violent and entrenched? Do you ever think about that, and where are the hidden pockets that you access?
I don't know. I get stuck in that sometimes, where it's really hard to find something to be hopeful. The things that make me feel hopeful right now are Heartcore. We start our next one tomorrow, and hopefully, more people will pick it up, and it can branch out with, different facilitators and different peers running it, taking it to different communities. That gives me hope, and wherever it goes, it's going to be different. We did ours, the first one. The one we're starting tomorrow is going to be completely different, and the next one will be completely different. It takes on the energy of the group, and so that gives me hope. But with and I do not like to call it an overdose crisis. It's a genocide. Hoping that the decision makers are going to, or the people who are holding the key to everything that can, stop what's happening at an alarming rate, that gives me hope. But at the same time, it's easy to give up hope on that.
But what I do find is that I have places where I can go inside myself that have some rest, and I have, beadwork really helps me to come home and return to my body, and so there's some ease in that and some return to stability so that I can keep being in the world where I may not find hope predominantly. But that being said, I find I am most hopeful when I am around the straightforwardness and the community care that I see and experience in the downtown east side. Mm-hmm. And that I don't see that in a lot of my work. Like when I'm working with muckety-mucks, there isn't that care, there isn't that directness. And one of the beautiful things about people in the downtown east side, and this isn't like a romantic notion, is that people are very community minded. Yes, mm-hmm. They're individually minded too. It's not like that doesn't exist, but they're really looking after each other. And I don't see that when I sit around boardrooms. I don't see that when I work in not-for-profits. I don't see that when I work with, a group of lawyers or doctors. They're not community-minded or community caring. And so while things are incredibly painful, I mean, part of what we experienced in the first round of the course of Heartcore is that our group didn't look the same from the first to the last class, that some people had died.
Yep.
Some of the cohort had died.
Yep.
And that is the daily life of people, and the loss is tremendous. And yet people continue to show up and say, I'm going to learn these tools so I can support someone. And that's stunning to me. And that's where, and that the expertise is there, right? People know how to look after themselves and care for themselves, but they also know, if I can care for me, I can care for this other person too.
Yeah, that is really true, and that was really heartbreaking. And then just finding out last week another person had died, so it's alarming. But you're right, people show up at places in the downtown east side, at the drug user groups and the clinics and stuff like that, because they want to be there. They're not there because they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They're there because that's where they're needed. That's where they want to be. That's where they're with their people. There's always a lot of inner conflict, or in the groups themselves, because there's a lot of big personalities and there's a lot of survival skills. People down there have different survival skills maybe than someone in a boardroom. You're not going to find more, what's a good word? I guess straightforward, strong, say it like it is people than there.
Yeah, it's very direct advocacy.
Very direct.
And I would actually say, like, when I'm in sessions and in spaces with muckety mucks, that there is the same amount of conflict and tension, but their behaviors are very, very, like, they embody it in a different way. They behave differently, and they use different set of rules and conducts. And I much prefer the direct approach that, like, I feel really deeply comfortable and at home when we're with our people. And part of that is, like, there's a big thinkingness, and we're overlooked a lot, right? Like, we're seen as, we're not the experts, that's on the outside of our collective. And actually that's part of my experience with the Heartcore curriculum, is that even when we're working with nurses and people through the various health authorities, what we're experiencing is this curriculum is being upheld and really strongly advocated for. And it's found a really strong group of champions to be able to continue to do it. And that we're seeing it, only one pilot in, it's already making ripple effects and really positive change, which that's exactly what we want.
That's so cool. Like, by the time we'd finished our first pilot, there were 2 more groups waiting. The one we start tomorrow, and then the next one will be soon after. But that's pretty cool. And that idea, like, when we had talked about, like, when we did that funny exercise on the word bubble thing and the brainstorming bubble, and to come up with Heartcore, and that we are a circle, and it's the real traditional idea of a circle, that everyone, there is no hierarchy, there is a place for everyone, there's no beginning or end, and everyone belongs. And the idea that we are all resources for each other, and we are resources for ourselves, and we are putting resources inside of ourselves. So the circle of resources, really, and then it's the most heartfelt
curriculum because everyone's speaking from experience.
Exactly, and that's, one of the many great things about having you there is you bring so many wonderful stories and teachings to the more clinical things that but you also know a good way to share it with people and a good way to bring it to people that's going to stick more than a clinical explanation of why something is happening, which is awesome, and that's what people are remembering.
When you think about how it should be working through and supporting each other through trauma, bringing tools to the toolbox to live through and cope with trauma.
That's how it has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things that might seem little, but are actually really important. The feedback forms. The first couple of sessions, we had one feedback form for how was this group, what did you do, blah, 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 blah. And a whole bunch of people use it as an opportunity to give feedback on the snacks that were brought and what kind of snacks they would like the next time. So now we have 2 feedback forms.
That was really good learning for me. I would never have known about when you're working with a group of people who are, using injection drugs and opiate drugs. I wouldn't have known that softer snacks, sweeter snacks, and it never would have occurred to me. I had to learn it. And so that people were very focused on, you've got all these crunchy vegetables and dudes, that's not right. We needed to hear that puddings and jellos and sweeter and softer. And that, I think, some of those should become so commonplace because that shows, we serve people what they like because we care about them. We changed it every single session for that reason. But you're right, learning from the feedback forms that it can't just say give us your feedback on today, because then everyone's like, yeah, I didn't like your snacks. What's your takeaway? I don't like chips. Or celery.
Yep. No, that's super important.
One of the really big takeaways in the curriculum that we learned is that repetition of content is important. All of us in the world learn through repetition. That we learn a song by hearing it over and over and over. We learn a poem by hearing it and reading it over and over. And so it's not about there's something different about this population. It's that we actually have to respect these very human traits and characteristics. And when we do it properly, we can actually support people better. And I think when this comes from peers, people are more likely to attach to it and stick with it. Doctors and nurses could do well to pay attention to what we're doing and to the curriculum that you are part of creating. That's another hopeful piece about the ripple effect of the work, right?
Yeah, who knows where it can go.
I don't take that for granted. I really I appreciate working with you and being connected with you so frequently, but also learning from you.
Thank you.
Yeah, because really, you got this. And you're part of a really important circle of resources.
I have a great team.
Yeah. So I'm really happy you came and
Me too.
had this visit and conversation. And also, I'm just really happy I get to work alongside be with you in our life.
Well,
So
likewise.
yeah.
I've learned a tremendous amount from you, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that concludes our conversation with Wendy Stevens. Please come back and join us for our next conversation with Valerie Nicholson.